Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business. And tonight we will continue our dive into the second short story contained within the pages of the Bachman books. The Long Walk. I'm Harkness, number 49. You're Garrety, number 47, right? Garrety looked at Harkness, who wore glasses and had a crew cut. Harkness's face was red and sweaty. That's right. Harkness had a notebook. He wrote Garrety's name and number in it. The script was strange and jerky, bumping up and down as he walked. He ran into a fellow named Collie Parker who told him to watch where the fuck he was going. Garrety suppressed a smile. I'm taking down everyone's name and number, Harkness said. When he looked up, the mid-morning sun sparkled on the lenses of his glasses, and Garrety had to squint to see his face. It was 10:30 and they were 8 miles out of Limestone, and they had only 1.75 miles to go to beat the record of the farthest distance traveled by a complete long walk group. I suppose you're wondering why I'm writing down everyone's name and number. You're with the squads, Olson cracked over his shoulder. No, I'm going to write a book, Harkness said pleasantly. When this is all over, I'm going to write a book. Garrety grinned. If you win, you're going to write a book, you mean? Harkness shrugged. Yes, I suppose. But look at this. A book about the long walk from an insider's point of view could make me a rich man. McVrees burst out laughing. If you win, you won't need a book to make you a rich man, will you? Harkness frowned. Well, I suppose not. But it would still make one heck of an interesting book, I think. They walked on, and Harkness continued taking names and numbers. Most gave them willingly enough, joshing him about the great book. Now they had come 6 miles. The word came back that it looked good for breaking the record. Garrety speculated briefly on why they should want to break the record anyhow. The quicker the competition dropped out, the better the odds became for those remaining. He supposed it was a matter of pride. The word also came back that thunder showers were in the forecast for this afternoon. Someone had a transistor radio, Garrety supposed. If it was true, it was bad news. Early May thunder showers weren't the warmest. They kept walking. McVrees walked firmly, keeping his head up and swinging his arms slightly. He had tried the shoulder, but fighting the loose soil there had made him give it up. He hadn't been warned, and if the knapsack was giving him any trouble or chafing, he showed no sign. His eyes were always searching the horizon. When they passed small clusters of people, he waved and smiled his thin-lipped smile. He showed no signs of tiring. Baker ambled along, moving in a kind of knee-bent shuffle that seemed to cover the ground when you weren't looking. He swung his coat idly, smiled at the pointing people, and sometimes whistled a low snatch of some tune or another. Garrety thought he looked like he could go on forever. Olson wasn't talking so much anymore, and every few moments he would bend one knee swiftly. Each time Garrety could hear the joint pop. Olson was stiffening up a little, Garrety thought, beginning to show 6 miles of walking. Garrety judged that one of his canteens must be about empty. Olson would have to pee before too long. Barkovitch kept up the same jerky pace, now ahead of the main group, as if to catch up with the vanguard walkers, now dropping back towards Stebbins' position on drag. He lost one of his 3 warnings and gained it back 5 minutes later. Garrety decided he must like it there on the edge of nothing. Stebbins just kept on walking off by himself. Garrety hadn't seen him speak to anybody. He wondered if Stebbins was lonely or tired. He thought Stebbins would fold up early. Maybe first. Although he didn't know why he thought so. Stebbins had taken off the old green sweater, and he carried the last jelly sandwich in his hand. He looked at no one. His face was a mask. They walked on. The road was crossed by another, and policemen were holding up traffic as the walkers passed. They saluted each walker, and a couple of the boys, secure in their immunity, thumbed their noses. Garrety didn't approve. He smiled and nodded to acknowledge the police, and wondered if the police thought they were all crazy. The cars honked, and then some woman yelled out to her son. She had parked beside the road, apparently waiting to make sure her boy was still along for the walk. "Percy! Percy!" It was number 31. He blushed and then waved a little, and then hurried on with his head slightly bent. The woman tried to run out into the road. The guards on top of the deck of the half-track stiffened, but one of the policemen caught her arm and restrained her gently. Then the road curved and the intersection was out of sight. They passed across a wooden slatted bridge. A small brook gurgled its way underneath. Garrety walked close to the railing, and looking over, he could see his own reflection just for a moment. A distorted image of his own face. They passed a sign, which read, and then, under a rippling banner, which said, Garrety figured they had to be less than a mile from breaking the record. Then the word came back, and this time the word was about a boy named Curly, number 7. Curly had a Charlie horse and already had picked up his first warning. Garrety put on some speed and came even with McVries and Olson. "Where is he?" Olson jerked his thumb at a skinny, gangling boy in blue jeans. Curly had been trying to cultivate sideburns. The sideburns had failed. His lean and earnest face was now set in lines of terrific concentration, and he was staring at his right leg. He was favoring it. He was losing ground, and his face showed it. "Warning! Warning number 7. Curly began to force himself faster. He was panting a little, as much from fear as from his exertions, Garrety thought. Garrety lost all track of time. He forgot everything but Curly. He watched him struggle, realizing in a numb sort of way that this might be his own struggle an hour from now or a day from now. It was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. Curly fell back slowly, and several warnings were issued to others before the group realized they were adjusting to his speed in their fascination, which meant Curly was very close to the edge. "Warning! Warning number 7. Third warning, number 7. "I've got a Charlie horse!" Curly shouted hoarsely. "It ain't no fair if you got a Charlie horse!" He was almost beside Garrety now. Garrety could see Curly's Adam's apple going up and down. Curly was massaging his leg frantically, and Garrety could smell panic coming off Curly in waves, and it was like the smell of a ripe, freshly cut lemon. Garrety began to pull ahead of him, and the next moment Curly exclaimed, "Thank God! She's loosening!" No one said anything. Garrety felt a grudging disappointment. It was mean and unsporting, and he supposed, but he wanted to be sure someone got a ticket before he did. Who wants to bow out first? Garrety's watch said 11:05 now. He supposed that meant that they had beaten the record, figuring 2 hours times 4 miles an hour. They would be in Limestone soon. He saw Olson flex first one knee, and then the other again. Curious, he tried it himself. His knee joints popped audibly, and he was surprised to find how much stiffness had settled into them. Still, his feet didn't hurt. That was something. They passed a milk truck, parked at the head of a small dirt feeder road. The milkman was sitting on the hood. He waved good-naturedly. "Go to it, boys!" Garrety felt suddenly angry. He felt like yelling. "Why don't you get up off your fat ass and go do it with us?" But the milkman was past 18. In fact, he looked well past 30. He was old. "Okay, everybody take 5. Olson cracked suddenly and got some laughs. The milk truck was out of sight. There were more roads now, more policemen and people honking and waving. Someone threw confetti. Garrety began to feel important. He was, after all, Maine's own. Suddenly, Curly screamed. Garrety looked back over his shoulder, and Curly was doubled over, holding his leg and screaming. Somehow, incredibly, he was still walking, but very slowly, much too slowly. Everything went slowly then, as if to match the way Curly was walking. The soldiers on the back of the slow-moving half-track raised their guns. The crowd gasped, as if they hadn't known this was the way it was. And the walkers gasped, as if they hadn't known, and Garrety gasped with them. But of course he had known. Of course they had all known. It was very simple. Curly was going to get his ticket. The safeties clicked off. Boys scattered from around Curly like quail. He was suddenly alone on the sun-washed road. "It isn't fair!" he screamed. "It just isn't fair!" The walking boys entered a leafy glade of shadow. Some of them looking back, some of them looking straight ahead, afraid to see. Garrety was looking. He had to look. The scatter of waving spectators had fallen silent, as if someone had simply clicked them all off. "It isn't..." 4 carbines fired. They were very loud. The noise traveled away like bowling balls, struck the hills and rolled back. Curly's angular, pimply head disappeared in a hammer smash of blood and brains and flying skull fragments. The rest of him fell forward on the white line like a sack of mail. 99 now, Garrety thought sickly. 99 bottles of beer on the wall, and one of those bottles should happen to fall. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Stebbins stepped over the body. His foot slid a little in some of the blood, and his next step with that foot left a bloody track, like a photograph in an official detective magazine. Stebbins didn't look down at what was left of Curly. His face didn't change expressions. "Stebbins, you bastard," Garrety thought. "You were supposed to get your ticket first. Didn't you know?" And then Garrety looked away. He didn't want to be sick. He didn't want to vomit. A woman beside a Volkswagen bus put her face in her hands. She made odd noises in her throat, and Garrety found he could look right up her dress to her underpants, her blue underpants. Inexplicably, he found himself aroused again. A fat man with a bald head was staring at Curly and rubbing frantically at a wart beside his ear. He wet his large, thick lips and went on looking and rubbing the wart. He was still looking at Garrety when Garrety passed him by. They walked on. Garrety found himself walking with Olson, Baker, and McBreeze again. They were almost protectively bunched up. All of them were looking straight ahead now, their faces carefully expressionless. The echoes of the carbines seemed to hang in the still air. Garrety kept thinking about the bloody footprint that Stebbins' tennis shoe had left. He wondered if it was still tracking red. Almost turned his head to look, and then he told himself not to be a fool. But he couldn't help wondering. He wondered if it had hurt Curly. He wondered if Curly had felt the gas-tipped slugs hitting home, or if he had just been alive 1 second and dead the next. But of course it had hurt. It had hurt before, in the worst, rupturing way. Knowing there would be no more you, but the universe would roll on just the same, unharmed and unhampered. The word came back that they had made almost 9 miles before Curly bought his ticket. The Major was said to be as pleased as Punch. Garrety wondered how anyone could know where the hell the Major even was. He looked back suddenly, wanting to know what was being done with Curly's body, but they had already rounded another curve. Curly was out of sight. "What have you got in that pack sack?" Baker asked McVrees suddenly. He was making an effort to be strictly conversational, but his voice was high and reedy, near to cracking. "I got a fresh shirt," McVrees said, "and some raw hamburger." "Raw hamburger?" Olson made a sick face. "Good, fast energy in raw hamburger," McVrees said. "You're off your trolley. You'll puke all over the place." McVrees only smiled. Garrety kind of wished he had brought some raw hamburger himself. He didn't know about fast energy, but he liked raw hamburger. It beat chocolate bars and concentrates. Suddenly he thought of his cookies, but after Curly he wasn't very hungry. After Curly, could he really have been thinking about eating raw hamburger? The word that one of the walkers had been ticketed out ran through the spectators, and for some reason they began to cheer even more loudly. Thin applause crackled like popcorn. Garrety wondered if it was embarrassing being shot in front of people, and guessed by the time you got to that you probably didn't give a tin whistle. Curly hadn't looked like he gave a tin whistle, certainly. Having to relieve yourself, though, that would be bad. Garrety decided not to think about that. The hands on his watch now stood firmly straight up at noon. They crossed a rusty iron bridge spanning a high, dry gorge, and on the other side was a sign reading, "Entering Limestone City Limits. Welcome, long walkers." Some of the boys cheered, but Garrety saved his breath. The road widened, and the walkers spread across it comfortably, the groups loosening up a little. After all, Curly was 3 miles back now. Garrety took out his cookies, and for a moment turned the foil package over in his hands. He thought homesickly of his mother, then stuffed the feeling aside. He would see Mum and Jan in Freeport. That was a promise. He ate a cookie and felt a little better. "You know something?" McVrees said. Garrety shook his head. He took a swig from his canteen and waved at an elderly couple sitting beside the road with a small cardboard Garrety sign. "I have no idea what I'll want if I do win this," McVrees said. "There's nothing that I really need. I mean, I don't have a sick old mother sitting at home or a father on a kidney machine or anything. I don't even have a little brother, dying gamely of leukemia." He laughed and unstrapped his canteen. "You've got a point there," Garrety agreed. "You mean I don't have a point there? The whole thing is pointless." "You don't really mean that," Garrety said confidently. "If you had to do it all over again, yeah, I'd still do it, but..." "Hey!" The boy ahead of them, Pearson, pointed. "Sidewalks!" They were finally coming into the town proper. Handsome houses set back from the road looked down at them, from the vantage of the ascending green lawns. The lawns were covered with people, waving and cheering. It seemed to Garrety that almost all of them were sitting down, sitting on the ground, on lawn chairs, like the old man back at the gas station, sitting on picnic tables, even sitting on swings and porch gliders. He felt a touch of jealous anger. "Go ahead, wave your asses off. I'll be damned if I wave back anymore. Hint 13. Conserve energy whenever possible." But he finally decided he was being foolish. People might decide he was getting snooty. After all, he was Maine's own. He decided he would wave to all the people with Garrety signs, and to all the pretty girls. Side streets and cross streets moved steadily past. Sycamore Street and Clark Avenue, Exchange Street and Juniper Lane. They passed a corner grocery with a beer sign in the window and a 5 and dime plastered with pictures of the Major. The sidewalks were lined with people, but thinly lined. On the whole, Garrety was disappointed. He knew the real crowds would come further down the line, but it was still something of a wet firecracker, and poor old Curly had even missed this. The Major's Jeep suddenly spurted out of a side street and began pacing the main group. The vanguard was still some distance ahead. A tremendous cheer went up. The Major nodded and smiled and waved to the crowd, and then he made a near left face and saluted the boys. Garrety felt a thrill go straight up his back. The Major's sunglasses glinted in the early afternoon sunlight. The Major raised the battery-powered loudhailer to his lips. "I'm proud of you, boys. I'm proud." From somewhere behind Garrety, a voice said, softly, but clearly, "Diddly shit." Garrety turned his head, but there was no one back there but 4 or 5 boys watching the Major intently. One of them realized he was saluting and dropped his hand sheepishly. And Stebbins did not even seem to be looking at the Major. The Jeep roared ahead. A moment later, the Major was gone again. They reached downtown Limestone around 12:30. Garrety was disappointed. It was pretty much of a one-hydrant town. There was a business section and 3 used car lots, and a McDonald's and a Burger King and a Pizza Hut and an industrial park, and that was Limestone. "It isn't very big, is it?" Baker said. Olson laughed. "It's probably a nice place to live," Garrety said defensively. "God fucking spare me from nice places to live," McVrees said, but he was still smiling. "Well, what turned you on?" Garrety said lamely. By 1 o'clock, Limestone was a memory. A small swaggering boy in patched denim overalls walked along with them for almost a mile, and then sat down and watched them go by. The country grew hillier. Garrety felt the first real sweat of the day coming on out of him. His shirt was patched to his back. On his right, thunderheads were forming, but they were still far away. There was a light circulating breeze, and that helped a little. "What's the next big town, Garrety?" McVrees asked. "Caribou, I guess." He was wondering if Stebbins had eaten his last sandwich yet. Stebbins had gotten into his head like a snatch of pop music that goes around and around until you think you're going to go crazy with it. It was 1:30. The long walk had progressed through 18 miles. How far's that? Garrety wondered what the record was for miles walked with only one walker punched out. 18 miles seemed pretty good to him. 18 miles was a figure a man could be proud of. I walked 18 miles. 18. I said, maybe 30 miles from here. 30? Pearson said. Jesus! It's a bigger town than Limestone, Garrety said. He was still feeling defensive. God knew why. Maybe because so many of these boys would die here. Maybe all of them. Probably all of them. Only 6 long walks in history had ended over the state line in New Hampshire, and only one had gotten into Massachusetts. And the experts said that was like Hank Aaron hitting 730 home runs or whatever it was, a record that would never be equaled. Maybe he would die here too. Maybe he would. But that was different. Native soil. He had an idea that the Major would like that. He died on his native soil. He tipped his canteen up and found it was empty. Canteen, he called. 47, calling for a canteen. One of the soldiers jumped off the half-track and brought over a fresh canteen. When he turned away, Garrety touched the rifle slung over the shoulder's back. He did it quickly, but McVrees saw him. Why did you do that? Garrety grinned and felt confused. I don't know. Like knocking on wood, maybe. You're a dear, dear boy, Ray, McVrees said, and then put on some speed and caught up with Olson. leaving Garrety to walk alone, feeling more confused than ever. Number 93. Garrety didn't know his name, walked right past him on Garrety's right. He was staring down at his feet, and his lips moved soundlessly as he counted his paces. He was weaving, slightly. "Hi," Garrety said. 93 cringed. There was a blankness in his eyes, the same blankness that had been in Curly's eyes while he was losing his fight with the Charlie horse. He's tired, Garrety thought. He knows it, and he's scared. Garrety suddenly felt his stomach tip over and right itself slowly. Their shadows walked alongside them now. It was 1:45. 9 in the morning. Cool. Sitting on the grass in the shade. This was a month back. At just before 2, the word came back again. Garrety was getting a first-hand lesson in the psychology of the grapevine. Someone found something out, and suddenly it was all over. Rumors were created by mouth-to-mouth respiration. It looks like rain. Chances are it's going to rain. It's going to rain pretty soon. The guy with the radio says it's going to ship potatoes pretty quick. But it was funny how often the grapevine was right. And when the word came back that someone was slowing up, that someone was in trouble. The grapevine was always right. This time the word was that number 9, Ewing, had developed blisters and had been warned twice. Lots of boys had been warned, but that was normal. The word was that things looked bad for Ewing. He passed the word back to Baker, and Baker looked surprised. "The black fella?" Baker said. "So black he sort of looks blue?" Garrety said he didn't know if Ewing was black or white. "Yeah, he's black," Pearson said. He pointed to Ewing. Garrety could see tiny jewels of perspiration gleaming in Ewing's natural. With something like horror, Garrety observed that Ewing was wearing sneakers. Hint number 3. Do not, repeat, do not wear sneakers. Nothing will give you blisters faster than sneakers on a long walk. "He rode up with us," Baker said. "He's from Texas." Baker picked up his pace until he was walking with Ewing. He talked with Ewing for quite a while, and then he dropped back slowly to avoid getting warned himself. His face was bleak. "He started to blister up 2 miles out. They started to break back in limestone. He's walking in pus from broken blisters." They all listened silently. Garrety thought of Stebbins again. Stebbins was wearing tennis shoes. Maybe Stebbins was fighting blisters right now. "Warning. Warning number 9. This is your 3rd warning, number 9. The soldiers were watching Ewing carefully now. So were the walkers. Ewing was in the spotlight. The back of his t-shirt, startlingly white against his black skin, was sweat-stained, gray straight down the middle. Garrety could see the big muscles on his back ripple as he walked. Muscles enough to last for days. And Baker said he was walking in pus. Blisters and Charlie horses. Garrety shivered. Sudden death. All those muscles and all the training couldn't stop blisters and Charlie horses. What in the name of God had Ewing been thinking when he put on those PF flyers? Barkovitch joined them. Barkovitch was looking at Ewing too. "Blisters!" He made it sound like Ewing's mother was a whore. "What the hell can you expect from a dumb nigger? Now I ask you that." "Move away," Baker said evenly, "or I'll poke you." "It's against the rules," Barkovitch said with a smirk. "Keep that in mind, cracker." But he moved away. It was as if he took a small poison cloud with him. 2 o'clock became 2:30. Their shadows got longer. They walked up a long hill, and at the crest Garrety could see low mountains, hazy and blue in the distance. The encroaching thunderheads to the west were darker now, and the breeze had stiffened, making his flesh goosebump as the sweat dried on him. A group of men clustered around a Ford pickup truck with a camper on the back cheered them crazily. The men were all very drunk. They all waved back at the men, even Ewing. They were the first spectators they had seen since the swaggering little boy in the patched overalls. Garrety broke open a concentrate tube without reading the label and ate it. It tasted slightly porky. He thought about McVrie's raw hamburger. He thought about a great big chocolate cake with a cherry on top. He thought about flapjacks. For some crazy reason, he wanted a cold flapjack full of apple jelly. The cold lunch his mother always made when him and his father went hunting in November. Ewing brought a hole about 10 minutes later. He was clustered in with a group of boys when he fell below speed for the last time. Maybe he thought the boys would protect him. The soldiers did their job well. The soldiers were experts. They pushed the other boys aside. They dragged Ewing over to the shoulder. Ewing tried to fight, but not much. One of the soldiers pinned Ewing's arms behind him, while the other put his carbine up to Ewing's head and shot him. One leg kicked convulsively. "He bleeds the same color as everyone else," McVrie said suddenly. He was very loud in the stillness after the single shot. His Adam's apple bobbed, and something clicked in his throat. Two of them gone now. The odds infinitesimally adjusted in favor of those remaining. There was some subdued talk, and Garrety wondered again what they did with the bodies. "You wonder too goddamn much," he shouted at himself suddenly. And he realized he was tired. That was chapter 2 of The Long Walk, the first short story contained within the pages of the Bachman books. Our man Garrety is doing okay. For now. DeVries is doing all right. They're all doing all right. It seems that the ones who are having trouble, it's just unseen. It's like Garrety said, all the training in the world can't prepare you for blisters and Charlie horses. If you get a Charlie horse, you can't walk. That's it. I guess you could hop, but think about how painful that shit would be. You couldn't hop for a day. You couldn't hop for 15 minutes. So it's pretty deadly what these boys are doing. And fucking Barkovitch, were we ever right about this piece of shit? I knew he was going to be trouble. I knew it. I could fucking feel it coming off Barkovitch. But the walk continues, and we will pick it up next time, because this has been Doctorpiece Theater. And my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,